Hey everyone, welcome to Vantage Real Talks. If you haven't gotten to join us before, Vantage is an amplifier of scalable startups in West Virginia, and we're using this Real Talk to chat with exceptional individuals, their why, their how, they're doing what they're doing. We're obsessed with entrepreneurs and the whole world of what disruption and innovation looks like to kind of move us forward. And today we're super excited to get a chance to chat with Dr. Thorsten Wuest. He's an amazing member of faculty at West Virginia University. A huge part of what Vantage Ventures does is get to work really closely with some outstanding researchers and faculty that are helping drive the cutting edge of what's coming next. So companies, before they even can be companies, there's technology behind it and thoughts about how do we keep innovating and making new processes. And certainly, today, just really excited to talk with you and think about how digital supply networks are just ever more important. You've worked on it forever, and certainly, current circumstances, COVID-19 has made us all acutely aware of what supply chains even are and what happens when there's any kind of weak links or anything that's too slow. And so just thank you so much for joining us. And
happy to be here. Yeah.
Great. Do you mind? So I want to dive in and hear about so many different elements of the work you all are doing and have just released a new book about. But first, do you mind giving everyone a quick rundown of how you ended up in West Virginia and what your path has been until this point?
Absolutely. Yeah, Kelsey, thank you so much, first of all, for having me today and giving me the opportunity to chat with you. I witnessed a few of the previous Real Talks here with Jonathan, a close friend, Kristen from Hyperloop team. So I'm really excited to be here and share some of the work we've been doing, and I believe will be really impactful in the future. But yeah, a little bit to myself. As Kelsey said, I'm Thorsten Wuest, a faculty member in the Stadler College in the Industrial Engineering Department. How did I come to West Virginia? That's actually a pretty good question. You probably already figured out by my name and my accent that I'm not from the US originally. I'm from Germany, southern parts of Germany. And my journey was not very straight when you think of that. I grew up, of course, and then in Germany, they still had compulsory military service. So I joined. Basically, on Saturday it was prom, on Monday I was in the barracks for basic training. Surprisingly, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And we had 9 months compulsory service. And after the basic training period, it got really boring. So I decided to enlist for the reserves, and I'm a lieutenant there in the army, like the infantry. And during that time, I had the chance to meet a lot of people and travel all over Germany for a lot of training and the officers' school and war training and all that kind of stuff. And after that, I decided, okay, hey, I want to go to study engineering, not enlist for a career. So I left after the 2 years I signed up for, and started to study a 5-year program. Back then they had a combined bachelor-master program in industrial engineering and management, which was jointly hosted by the business school and the engineering school. So I had that interest in both sides, which you will also see in the book. And I guess the involvement in Vantage Ventures also exemplifies that a little bit. Then for that 5-year program, I got involved in a lot of things. Among others, I had a major in logistics and supply chain management. But halfway through it, I wanted to study abroad. And I briefly considered the US, but then decided to go to New Zealand because, very trivial reason, it's a beautiful country. And it's actually the direct opposite of where I was living in Germany when you cut through the center of the earth. So I went down there originally for a semester, but again, I like to jump on opportunities when they emerge. And after the first few exams, the professor approached me and asked if I would consider staying for a master's even though I didn't have officially any degree yet because my program was a combined program. But I stayed on for another year for a master in business, in international business. Completed that. Almost stayed in New Zealand because I got an offer from a supply chain company down there, but got a better offer from Switzerland for a consulting company, and worked in Zurich and Bern for half a year before going to ThyssenKrupp in their research center to do some research for my master thesis to complete my degree in Germany. Still with the vision of entering the corporate world and probably become a consultant. However, during the time of my master thesis, which was during another crisis a little while back, like 2008, 2009, I also realized that a lot of the problems in the corporate world are, of course, stressful and take a lot of effort and intellectual capability, but you're also driven by results that you have to complete it in a certain time, and 90% is often good enough, and you don't have really the time to think beyond that. And I thought, hey, maybe I got an offer for a PhD position, which in Germany are fully paid positions. I thought, okay, let's do that for a few years, still with the intention of going into industry after completing the PhD. During that time, again, it changed a little bit, and I realized, hey, I really enjoy working with students. I really enjoy deciding who I want to work with. That's the beauty of academia. If you enjoy working with somebody, you can find the means of setting up a project, finding common ground, and working with that person. If you don't, well, nobody can really force you to do that. And I think that is really a privilege, and I really enjoy that. So during that time, getting my PhD in production engineering, I also spent a year in California at the University of Southern California, funded by a fellowship to work more on my research. And the reason why I chose Los Angeles and California is because my wife is there. We met in New Zealand, had a long distance relationship for the longest. And after a certain amount of time, you just want to settle down together, right? I guess that's understandable. And we decided to settle down in the US for obvious reasons. She's American. The research domain here is pretty strong. And that's kind of like in the middle between Germany and California. I applied for a bunch of positions, among others, West Virginia. I have to be honest, I haven't heard of Morgantown or the university before much. In the end, I did, but I didn't know that at that point. And I came here for an interview, and after that, when I got the offer, I had some other interviews lined up, but I just canceled them and decided I don't even go there, and directly accepted, and have been here ever since.
Yeah, well, we're so happy to have you. I'm like totally gonna take it as flattery for West Virginia that you lived in all these other places and now are settled here. And so
I would say it's kind of like Switzerland, a little less hilly maybe, and it's kind of like New Zealand, just with a little less ocean, a little bit less palm trees, but other than that, a lot of nature, a lot of hills. It's close to how I grew up in southern Germany, landscape wise, and the people are wonderful. So yeah, wild and wonderful, yeah, I guess.
Yeah. That's awesome. And what an interesting background. I mean, talk about kind of constantly adapting and shifting to what the environment was. And I think, I'm certainly feeling lucky that you decided to go the academic route, to think that last 10% to really deep dive into issues like, we'll talk about today, different, smart manufacturing and this larger world of a digital supply network and what that means. Because it's really complicated and at first, and it's daunting, and it's, it's something that does take, some folks who are going to fully kind of immerse and learn everything there is to learn about it, to then help whether it's large companies kind of change what their internal structures have been and adapt to this new world and changing economy, or if it's, in our case, certainly looking at all of the potential and opportunity for new startups and how to kind of be smart and thinking ahead as we're building brand new business models and companies and technologies. So that's, I think your background, it just goes to show what all it takes. It takes a village, all these different folks thinking about these problems from different angles. And I'm sensitive. I keep saying digital supply network. Do you mind giving just the kind of basic definition of that world? And, I'm thinking about how the thinking seems to have shifted from a chain to a network, and what am I talking about when I'm saying those words?
All right. Well, yeah. Now that you mention it, I will hold up our brand. Well, okay. That's the technology, right? Choose background effect. I can probably turn that off real quick so we can see the book. Our new book just came out today. It's available on Amazon. The hint intended. Yes, absolutely. So please buy our book. Now, it was just released today, and we're extremely excited about. It's a joint effort, so it's not that that I wrote that by myself or so. As you mentioned before, it takes a village, and in this case, this book was really written by an exceptional author team, I believe, with Ed from the business school, who runs the global supply chain program at WVU. And 2 consultants from Deloitte who run their supply chain practice and are working on implementing some of these things in industry at this moment. So I believe this gives us exceptional insights from both the theory side and also the practical side. And again, the different perspectives that we bring in, like one author has a strong background in the SAP, IT, ERP side. With Ed, we have the supply chain theory and the supply chain aspect, and I bring the product service system, business model, and smart manufacturing aspect to the table. And that, as you said, this was a long time in the making. We worked on that over 2 years, and it took a lot of discussion just to figure out the story and how all the different elements connect, because it is not a trivial problem. It is a complex problem. And now COVID, the pandemic hit, this black swan event that nobody really foresaw. And we all know it had a significant impact on supply chains, and it disrupted them significantly. We all know the toilet paper crisis, which is still a mystery why that happened. But I mean, there are some indicators what went wrong there. But that's what we saw when we went to the supermarkets and saw that, hey, there's not all the zucchini there anymore, or we don't get any frozen chicken, just as an experience everybody probably had. But there are some other significant portions of that are more problematic than not having chicken. We still had other food. It's not a life and death thing, but PPE is a problem, or pieces for ventilators, or that car manufacturers had to shut down because they couldn't find one, couldn't get the delivery of one piece from a supplier overseas in time, and the whole production stopped. And in my old institution, I did some work with one of the leading automotive manufacturers, and I know for a fact that some of their suppliers that were maybe 2 miles outside of their main assembly plant, they had a helipad for the reason, in case they couldn't deliver on time, that they could chopper it in to the OEM, because as soon as the assembly line stops, it costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour, because it has to run, right? It's such a complex operation. And now imagine what impact COVID had and these interruptions in supply. And in that sense, both lucky and unlucky with our book launch, I believe. Unlucky because we can't have the in-person release, and of course, companies are a little hesitant in investing and so on. Nevertheless, we believe we're lucky in a sense that right now it's a time that this is dearly needed, because companies need advice how to navigate that and how to prepare for that in the future, and maybe shift their view from this, hey, we only focus on efficiency and cost, which makes sense in normal times, low stock levels and all, to, okay, how can we increase the visibility, the resilience of our supply chain? How can we identify local suppliers more effectively? How can we rearrange our supply network in an agile way to address any shortcomings or interruptions?
Yes, no, absolutely. And so clearly this has been something that you and your team have worked on, have been working on for a while, right? Before COVID kind of brought the spotlight onto supply chain and how critical these elements were that probably none of us, I certainly was never thinking too long and hard about how something got delivered to my hands, or, even how my Amazon package could make it to my door in 2 days. And what has kind of the larger landscape been in this evolution? So, we've all heard that COVID is accelerating us to really focus on a lot of advancements, and it kind of is moving us. Some people say, oh, we're really getting pushed to like 2030, where we would have been naturally. What's been the overarching trend and kind of history of, let's say, the traditional supply chain, and those innovation and disruptions that are now moving to today, move us to today, where we're starting, we're thinking more and more as a society about reactive networks and being able to adapt really quickly to information. And then what does it look like in the future? Like, if you could.
Yeah, no problem. When you said reactive, that directly triggered something. I think like maybe we should aim for proactive, or to say, okay, we anticipate and we predict and we understand what impact that has on all the moving pieces, and can help can use the help of all the amazing technology that's out there or is being developed and being applied to different problems, like AI, that blockchain, all these hype words that are out there for a while. And I mean, every company at least had a CEO shake the hand of a robot. A lot of times that the companies are recognize that they have to rethink their processes. And you're right, COVID kind of like took the sledgehammer and reinforced that a little bit. We could clearly see that companies that have this digital core close to their heart and are built around that digital nature, like Tesla, like Amazon, they did rather well during this pandemic, because they were able to adapt. They were able to rethink and repurpose their supply chain rather quickly, compared to some of the other companies that are more traditional and maybe not on the forefront of that digital development. When we think of our big three automotives, which also did a great job in trying to adapt, but they're not a tech company like Tesla that also builds cars. They're a car company that tries to get into the tech world. So in that, I think that is a big difference. And coming from Germany, the Industry 4.0 paradigm stems from that, and that's the merger of the virtual and the physical world in the end. So it is out there, and I believe in the US it also now they use that term. Before it was more like smart manufacturing or industrial internet, with GE trying to establish that term and failed miserably. I shouldn't say that on camera, but I mean, it's common notice. Unfortunately, I think they had some good ideas, but execution and some of the infrastructure was missing. So now there's a much better approach, and the US did or made a lot of progress in that, and I'm very excited about that. Especially with the Manufacturing USA institutes being installed all around the country. WVU is involved in a few, and we got 2 projects awarded from them. So we're really excited of working with them to drive that here. One major difference is, and let me go back to 2017, when we did a survey of smaller manufacturers here in West Virginia to understand where they are in the moment. Because a lot of the manufacturing is done by smaller companies. And they face very different challenges when it comes to digitization than the big behemoths, right? Because they don't have a dedicated digitization team. They don't have a IT department. They can't pay Accenture or another consultancy a huge amount of money to do it for them, and then maintain it. So we realized, hey, the landscape is actually pretty challenging in that space. And I even believe the difference here between Germany and the US is also significant. And one thing I hope that will change a little bit after this event here is the planning horizon. Like, not just a short-term solution, the short-term fix to keep afloat, but to think ahead. Like, a lot of the smaller companies in Europe or in Germany especially are family-owned, and even they're world market leaders, but family owned and not traded on the stock market, which has advantages and disadvantages. But one advantage is definitely the planning horizon and the understanding of the company, saying like, oh, we invest now and we don't have to see, I don't know, the ROI within 6 months. We're aware that it might take 5 years to gain market leadership in that space. But then you are the market leader who is really ahead of the game, and then you plan for the next 50 years, which is necessary in some of these cases, because we can buy AI solutions off the shelf, install it, and reap some benefits, but they're limited. And that's, I think, one of the core messages of our book. We have a playbook in the end that tries to integrate these technologies after they're introduced and say like, hey, it's not enough to buy a Microsoft HoloLens, go on the shop floor and have some apps downloaded and help your operator to be a little bit more efficient. You really have to understand what really drives your value, what really is your strategic goal, and align these tactics or the technologies and the installations and the prototypes with your long-term strategic goal and transform your processes accordingly. And that's not trivial, and that's not a short-term thing. That's a project that takes everybody to pull at the same string, and it's a team of engineers, business people, IT, you name it. Like here we really need the human ingenuity and the interdisciplinarity, and startups, definitely.
Yeah. And is there, I guess that's a question I have hearing you talk about this. It sounds like it certainly there are the really big companies that can afford to kind of build an in-house team that's going to take on this project and kind of, maybe if they're committed to it, rework these systems from the inside out and really be, commit to that shift. For, as you were mentioning, smaller manufacturers or kind of everyone else that can't afford to probably either hire or train an entire team to take that on and really do it themselves. What does the landscape look like? Like, are there a bunch of kind of different service providers that folks end up stringing together to make something work into like a quilt pattern of different services and data collection and AI? Or is it, there's a company you can call that will come in and turn you into Amazon? Like how?
No, that's a very good question, and I guess there's no straightforward answer like that. That's how it's done. I know a variety of different setups, and let me just share a few. Like one of them that I'm really excited about. It's a joint work with a traditional equipment manufacturer, like manufacturing equipment, that has a lot of legacy equipment in the field, not digitized. The market leader in the U.S. in that space, but it's not a tech company. It's a manufacturing equipment company. And they realized that. And they looked at the market and saw, hey, they talked to, the Rockwells and Siemens and the big players that allow you to buy off-the-shelf solution, customize it for a significant amount of money, but you get a really good and robust solution. You're also locked in most cases, right, in that solution. So it's hard to switch afterwards, which companies learned that might not be a smart move. So in that case, they teamed up with a startup that I work with rather closely up in Pittsburgh, Maven Machines. They also have a case study in our book here. And together they developed in a amazing timeline. Like within a year, they had a prototype. They had the data streaming live from the facility floor to the nicely visualized cloud platform. Amazing, like really, really fast. And they adapted on the spot. Like they did not the typical engineering, traditional engineering development, saying like, oh, we try to get your requirements, we build a solution, we go back to you after like 6 months when it's fully built, get your feedback, and then try to fix. No, they went, built the first solution, showed it, directly incorporated feedback. This agile process that makes the startup software world and app world so innovative, and they applied that to that traditional manufacturing space. Very exciting, and we're involved in that, looking at the data side, and also try to be a translator between the worlds, because manufacturing sometimes speaks a different language from IT, IoT development. And I feel we are a good cog in that wheel in a positive sense. I'm not sure if that's the right phrase. So that's one case where traditional company partners with a startup. it has a win-win because the traditional company gets capabilities they don't have because they don't have like the young software developers who know the newest code and new design languages and all that. On the other side, the startup gets an established customer and can prove what they're able to do and can showcase that on real data and not just, like a prototype solution. No, it's in the field. And for us, it's great because we get real data, we learn from the process, and we can bring in our data analytics expertise in that. So it's a win-win-win, and like Michael Gary Scott says, win. So it's a 4-win situation. It's wonderful. The other thing that happened recently, I was a consultant for a company, automotive supplier, and they looked into how to strategically approach digitizing their factory spaces. And they're a big company. Like they're not medium sized. They have like more than like 20 to 50,000 people worldwide. And they were really worried to be locked in when they decide we use this solution. What you mentioned, you could go to Siemens, you can go to PTC, say, hey, we buy your ThingWorx, we buy your MindSphere, and you get it. It works. You subscribe to that. Great. But then later, the switch and every addition and every re-engineering is problematic because it's such a big solution. And they actually went with a small startup as well for their build, and that startup integrates other types of solution, which forced them to increase their own IT team. But in the end, it was cheaper than the big solution from an established vendor. And they bought flexibility and ownership of the data. And for them, that was worth it. And that startup they partnered with is actually a subsidiary of another manufacturing company, but that realized that they built this expertise and now sell that through the startup to others and keep it open and flexible. So the landscape is very diverse, and there's probably a shoe that fits you, but it's hard to find that shoe. So.
I'm hearing a common thread of startups and innovation in here that I'm pretty excited about. But yeah, I mean, it's you spoke to two things, right? This opportunity where maybe a kind of early startup can really partner up and use it as an opportunity to prove their capability, and or a situation where there's we see this internal innovation happening from a large company, and there's a branch that has really got a startup mentality and moving quick and making fast adaptations, and then can actually kind of grow to be its own whole entity of expertise and share that, which is, it's really cool to see kind of an area that's leveraging all the different models of keeping things really fresh and changing and dynamic. Certainly, I'm sure they're all happy that they thought about that, as now COVID is making everyone look really closely at their systems. But, you mentioned, okay, long-term thinking, we all look at what do the next 2 years look like? What did the next 10 years look like? 50 years. And you mentioned Industry 4.0. Can you explain a little bit about, from your perspective, what the world of whether it's called smart manufacturing or the larger digital supply network world, but what that looks like in, let's call it 10 to 20 years, and maybe also let us know what Industry 4.0 is.
Well, okay. Let me start with the easy part, what Industry 4.0 is. Okay. So we all know when really manual labor was mechanized. That was the first industrial revolution, and that was a real revolution. Like there was bloodshed because people got their jobs taken away. For example, the cloth makers in Eastern Europe, they basically burned down a few factories with these mechanical looms because they were faster, produced better quality, and you need less labor, and that was their livelihood. So it was a real revolution, but it decoupled the manual labor from production output. So that was the first big change. And then the second industrial revolution actually happened here in the US, or is accredited here to Henry Ford, the moving assembly line, right? Where you don't build little stores, little things, but you really industrialize the production. And then in the 70s of the last century, we had all of a sudden computers and automation on the shop floor, like PLCs, HMIs, like robots, and so on. And now we move into, did I lose Lou?
Oh, I'm still here. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Yeah, and then the fourth industrial revolution is now basically the next step of that. We have a computerized shop floor, but it was not connected. Now it's connectivity, like the cyber physical system, where the cyber and the physical world converge, and the IT systems like ERP and so on merge with the operating technology, like the HMIs, PLCs, and so on. Sensors, IoT, that the cloud environment, data analytics, that all comes together in these cyber physical systems and enable us to have better insights, to forecast, to predict, to be proactive. And the goal in the end is really to produce like batch sizes of one, like a shoe specifically made for Kelsey that perfectly fits your requirement at the cost of a mass-produced Nike shoe.
Wow. Yeah, very interesting.
And you have two sides, like you have the smart side, smart manufacturing, which is the data analytics, data collection, and all that. And on the other side, you have advanced manufacturing, where we talk about new production methods like additive manufacturing or laser cutting and so on and so forth. Okay. The other question where you ask for the forecast, what happens in 10 to 20 years, I would even not try to forecast the next 5 years, but I know like I might be very off.
I really just want to know if I'm going to get a shoe made just for me within the next 5 years. Like, am I going to
absolutely.
be able to?
You can get that now if you want to,
sure,
but you have to pay the price. You don't get it for the, yeah, exactly. You don't get it at the mass-produced price. And I think we're still a way away from that. We wrote a paper in 2015, which was more like a visionary one, with colleagues that come from additive and from sensor technology. And there we proposed that, saying like, hey, we could add sensors in a shoe, have the person use it during the usage phase in the middle of life, collect the data, analyze it, and automatically adapt the design for the next generation shoe that you will buy, 3D printed with new sensors. And so with each generation, your shoe experience will improve until you have the perfect shoe. And it will adapt to changing, I don't know, weight, how you move, how you jump, what sports you do, and so on and so forth. But connectivity is key. Battery technology is a challenge. Production technology made huge progress.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so not only will I have my shoe, but it'll be an evolving shoe.
And you probably can actually watch the shoe being manufactured at all times. You know, oh, it's now 22% done. I know exactly what is done, and you can tweak it until it's really produced. That's what I would envision, because we have in 20 years we have full transparency of the production process. We really understand what happens from cradle to grave with our products. We're highly efficient, and humans will be relieved from all the manual tasks that are dangerous, dirty, boring, and can focus on what they're good at, like problem solving, making the process better, envisioning new systems, new solutions. I'm an academic. I can drink.
I mean, I like that forecast. Let's go with that one. Amazing. Well, there has been, so I think there are some questions that folks are posting on Facebook, and that's why I'm on my phone right now because my Wi-Fi cut out, but so you're gonna probably lose me visually for a moment while I check on those questions, and then I'll come back in just 1 second and have a couple questions from the audience for you. Okay, one asked, what do you think is on the horizon for digital supply chain in terms of reaching underserved populations?
Reaching in terms of working within that environment, or reaching them in terms of serving products to them? It's very hard to clarify.
Yeah, maybe I think you could take it both ways. I mean, it's an interesting question either way. Like, one, what does this mean for the future of the workforce, and how do folks fit into that as we move to these further and further kind of complicated systems? Maybe, and on the flip side, if you have thoughts on how does this improve how we can reach. I mean, certainly here in West Virginia, you know, there are different parts of the state up in the mountains. It's hard to get to, and it can take longer to, you know, get access to certain items, or, you know, and food supply chain is a perfect example there. How do we get fresh food into, you know, food deserts? And so I could see it going either way, whatever you'd rather.
Let me start with the latter and then move into the former. For food deserts, for example, that's an interesting application case, because in my previous projects, I was involved in not as the core partner, but as a side partner in a project for intelligent containers, where they basically looked at bananas. Sounds simple, but it's not trivial, because they ripen during the transport when they're shipped in containers. And nowadays, oftentimes you open the container and you figure out, oh man, they're all overripe, and people don't really like brown bananas that much. But there are now technologies and sensors available where you can control the oxygen level and the other gases that you need to ripen or slow down the ripening process of these bananas, as one example. And the other idea is then with a digital supply network, where you have full transparency and basically understand all the different nodes in your network, who would require the bananas at what point. Imagine the bananas arrive at the port, and then there's a supermarket 2 miles out that could sell them right now, right? So they're pretty ripe. They have to be sold now. Well, you deliver them, you reroute them on the spot, like in real time, to that supermarket. And when a container arrives that was originally planned for that supermarket, but they're not as ripe, you ship them to a supermarket that is a few hundred miles inland, because then they arrive there at the right ripeness level. And you can do that ad hoc, because you have understanding of what's happening within your process, and you have full transparency of that. So this transparency and agility of the process, I think, will help to serve food deserts that are left out a little bit because of the risk of food being spoiled or being, you know, wasted when people don't buy it. Because quite frankly, I don't know, I can only imagine when you go to a supermarket and you don't expect fresh produce, and all of a sudden there's fresh produce, you probably already bought other stuff, you know, then you probably won't buy it. But when you know that, and you see, you know, you can check that from your app, and we now all know how well online ordering of food works since the pandemic. So customers are accustomed to that. So you could check, oh, does that supermarket has kale or bananas or pineapples? And then the supply chain the supply network in that sense can try to readjust and to try to fulfill this order. The other side of the equation is, of course, it's strongly built on data and connectivity. So when you don't have internet access in a certain area, that presents a problem. But that presents not just a problem for digital supply networks, that presents a problem for society. I feel that is a societal issue that needs to be solved. Internet is something that people need nowadays for remote learning, for their daily lives, for paying taxes. You know, you need internet. So that is something that supply networks will probably not address. Maybe indirectly, as they increase the pressure of, let's say, Kroger, that they want to expand in these markets, and they're like, hey, our customers there need internet so they can sell it, and then they can put pressure on the legislator to make that happen, or sponsor the internet. I mean, corporate sponsorship is also a thing. The downside or the challenge that needs to be overcome is the ethics of AI, for example, and we saw a lot of that in how some AI algorithms, depending on how they fed with data, might have predictions in a certain way. And that needs to be studied and carefully assessed in order to address that.
I was just going to say, Thorsten, you'll have to join us. We're doing an AI ethics conversation in the fall that we're going to have.
Perfect.
Of amazing speakers and talk a lot about that, because it is
that's a very important topic, and that's across the board. And as AI is a core principle of digital supply networks, it also applies there. Probably less than in some societal application or policing, but nevertheless, it most likely has an impact and needs further study. I'm convinced of that. On terms of worker safety, of worker rights, and serving underserved groups, I feel having more transparency and connectedness within the supply network would allow us to make sure that workers are treated equally and rightly, that there's nobody taken advantage of or discriminated against, because we now have transparency of the data. When they say they always get a certain shift, which is not right, or they get paid less than the others for a similar output. You have more transparency, and probably it's harder to argue qualitatively when there's quantitative data that proves a certain point. So it could be used as a tool for good. We didn't really look into that issue too much, but that's one point. And the other point is humans are still key. Like, even so, it's called digital supply networks, and we talk about automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence. The human is still key. Like, these are just supporting tools. I don't believe anytime soon we will replace all human workers, and that should not be the goal. It should be relieving human workers from dangerous, boring tasks that are not made for humans. During my high school years, I worked in a store and had to stack shampoos for 8 hours a day in the 3 shifts. That's tough. The time doesn't go by, and I'd rather had worked on automating that process and reprogramming the robot, because that's interesting work, and you learn and you're intellectually challenged in doing that. Yeah. And I believe every human being deserves that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna check really quickly. I think there might be a couple more that are coming in. So one other, question came through of how can larger corporations work to more effectively partner with small kind of entrepreneurial companies or innovative arms?
That's a good question, and this is not easy, because larger companies have normally the pockets full of money, and they can decide how it works, and the smaller companies often don't have much choice. And on the more traditional side, we saw that a lot in the automotive space, where the OEM like VW and GM and so on dictated prices and cost savings for their suppliers, and the suppliers suffered a lot. And that's why we see a lot of big suppliers, because they had to accumulate enough power to counter this pressure point. And I think that is not a good recipe for a trustworthy and future-oriented relationship. So that being said, there's also a couple of other examples where that works better. And I believe when the startup has something that the large company knows it needs, sometimes the larger company either invests in the startup. I saw that in a couple of cases, like buys 20% of the shares in order to, have a vested interest and also a say. And it shows that, hey, we believe in you and we want to see that as a long-term partnership. So a great way to show that and to integrate without taking over and bringing your old, or I say old, but the more bureaucratic processes of a large organization to an agile and fast-moving startup. So you still have their freedom, can do the things how startups do things, mess up, fail, redo it, and be quicker than the others. On the other side, they still are invested in it. And a former colleague of mine, they have a company called Matchmaker Ventures. And what they do, basically, they bring together innovative startups and large corporations and try to establish that win-win and try to figure out the terms of that agreement. They do it solely for the telecommunications, because they come out of that consultancy that worked in that space. But there's a huge demand for that. With our collaboration here, there's also this startup with an established larger company. And that came up with a networking event, because the CEO of the larger company was at this tech conference, I believe, and met the CEO of the startup. And that's how that relationship developed. And I feel that's the way to go. And what still has to be figured out, and that's very individual to all the organizations and the industry and the field and the problem that's to be solved, how that relationship should be done, like organizationally on the ground. How much freedom does a startup need? How much control does a larger company can get? That's something to probably is a little trial and error.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. But I think, as you mentioned, it's hopefully something that we continue to see more and more experience in, and growing expertise in how to bring together some of the, kind of big enterprises that can benefit from folks who are able to be more agile and move quicker through solutions. But I don't want to take any more of your time today, but I will say folks may put other questions in the comments, and I want to encourage folks to do that, because maybe Dr. Wuest or the Vantage team, we can circle back and try to answer whatever we can.
Absolutely, yeah.
Certainly, well, everyone will have to check out your book. And
absolutely, buy the book today.
Yeah, as of today. And maybe it'll get to you via a digital supply network.
And maybe when the pandemic dies down, we can do a signing event at Advantage Ventures, and you can bring your book, and Ed and I are happy to sign.
Great, yeah, and we will definitely have to catch up with Ed as well, and excited to hear what's on his mind. But thank you so much for joining today, and have a great afternoon.
Wonderful, Kelsey. Thank you so much for having me, and have a great afternoon. Talk soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.